Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 394 through 396, which will cover manga chapters 500 through 502. So we finally made it to chapter 500, which is kind of crazy to think about. But yeah, things go from bad to worse, but we do get to see one of the, if not the best punch in the entire series. So, synopsis. Sanji calls upon their new allies in Duval and the newly rebranded Rosy Life Riders to help them in seeking out where Caime could have been taken to be sold, and it becomes a frantic race to find Caime before she gets sold into slavery. Now, on to the differences. So there are quite a few here. First one, in the anime, we get to see Duval try and hit on girls and fail in what kind of looks like Water 7 for some reason, but I don't think it is in Water 7, because why would it be? However, in the manga, this is only just briefly mentioned in dialogue rather than being shown. Next, the scene where Zoro drops off the wounded man at the hospital is also added in the anime, whereas in the manga, we do not actually see Zoro dropping off this man at the hospital to get his wounds treated. Thirdly, we get to see more of the auction in the anime. There's that initial conversation between the two people prior to the auction starting, talking about wanting to replace their slaves with new ones, as well as we see a few scenes of people kind of bidding on the slaves themselves, whereas in the manga, it kind of just hops around to just prior to when each slave is about to be sold, rather than the bidding actually being shown. Next, there's another kind of larger change, I guess. I mean, it ultimately really doesn't change too much, but the scene where Kid is talking about Law and says that he's got a bad attitude too, this moment kind of seems a bit weird and doesn't quite make much sense given what we've been told and shown, since all Law does here is harmlessly look over at them with kind of this weird grin on his face. However, this makes more sense in the manga, and so in the manga, Law looks back over his shoulder. He's actually not just looking back over at them, he's actually flipping the bird at Kid, which is why it prompts a response from Kid at all. And even the dialogue is changed from bad attitude to bad manners. This was obviously censored to remove the middle finger, but I don't understand why they didn't just cut this short couple second scene out entirely, since it just doesn't really add anything, and when you censor out the bird flipping, the whole scene kind of loses its meaning, because it's meant to show how Law is kind of this just bad attitude, bad mannered dick. And so when you kind of take that away, it's more like tell and not show, instead of, the tried and true show, don't tell, which is what we're supposed to do. But I mean, I understand why they censored it out, but I also don't understand why they kept this scene and dialogue in there, which doesn't really add anything. And then next, there's a bit more to the scene where Zoro is surrounded by the thugs. In the manga, it's just a tiny pie slice panel showing Zoro lost and surrounded, but this is actually given dialogue and a little bit more meat to it, I would say. And then there's also a couple extra scenes of Zoro getting lost again just before Caime gets put up for sale. But this scene goes on to explain why Zoro and Luffy arrive together at the auction house, as we see Luffy pick Zoro up. This often happens, actually, I feel like, where you get to point A to point B, and in the manga, you just immediately just see point B, but you don't really get to see what happens in between A and B. And so the anime actually does a decent job of filling some of these things in, because, yeah, it when in the manga, you don't really quite know why is Zoro with Luffy at this point. Like, you can kind of assume that they ran into each other and Luffy picked him up, but it's kind of nice to see that actually happened sometimes. That's it for the differences, so let's move into my thoughts on the episodes. So the episode starts off on a comical bit with Duval's immediate return to the story, as they've been called in to assist with finding Caime. Duval's excitement over his newfound looks is hilarious, as he melts away into depression, talking about how it didn't help with attracting girls as much as he thought it would. And turns out looks aren't everything. And I was still personally happy to see more of Duval and the Flying Fish Riders, or the newly rebranded Rosy Life Riders, because I found them to be pretty charming with how earnest they've become after they've sort of given up their sort of evil kidnapping ways. So it was nice to see them back. We then get to see the last scenes from the last episode from Chopper's perspective. And there are a couple things I love about this scene. First off, can we take a moment to appreciate how hard the Dendemushi is working to imitate the person on the other end? Like when Sanji is on the other line, it closes its eyes to account for the fact that Sanji's left eye is being hidden. And it's such a fun detail. And I love seeing the Dendemushis try and imitate the person that's on the other side. It's always really fun to see how they mimic the people. Of course, Luffy just speeds away without heeding Sanji's instructions, but that leaves Chopper and Brook to wait for Sanji's arrival. But this is a unique pairing as we have the youngest member of the Straw Hats in Chopper, who's a teenager, and Brook, the oldest member, closing in on his 90s. And Chopper begins to panic, but Brook has some sound advice in theory about how we choose to approach a crisis or any situation is as important as the action themselves. So when you're forced to wait patiently, there's no point in wasting precious energy panicking. It's important to remain calm for when it really is time to act. But in practice, as we see when Usopp arrives, Chopper and Brook have taken this philosophy to its extreme, and they're just kind of lounging around as if nothing has happened. And when we catch back up with Luffy and the others, we start to get the full picture of how rotten this world is. Of course, I have to mention this numerous times by now, as it's been alluded to heavily, but societally, there is an immense amount of racism and discrimination towards mer people and fish people. Now, I know this was written by a Japanese man, but I can't help but notice the parallels to the US's dark history with black people and African American people and slavery. Even though the world government recognizes fish people as actual citizens, just until 200 years ago, they were looked down upon as just fish, like the animal. And just like how black people were considered only property for the longest time in American history, it's very similar, I feel like, in terms of those two events in history. And even after being recognized by their respective governments, they still endure a great amount of discrimination and racism. This kind of comes as a shock to Nami, who's only known the tyrannical fishermen who have this sort of immense power, but even though on their own, fish people are 10 times stronger than a normal human, they can't stand up to the sheer number that the humans have on them. And this again just adds so much more complexities and layers to Arlong and his crew. Now, it doesn't change how evil and cruel Arlong was to the citizens of Kokoyashi, as well as everybody he's sort of ran into along his pirating ways. And I'm in no way saying that we should be sympathetic to Arlong, but you begin to kind of understand where his deep-seated hatred for humans comes from, and sort of this, I almost like compensating levels of elitism that he has over humans, because you can tell he was probably exposed to this at some point, especially when you see that mini like flashback of Hachi sort of looking up at the theme park with Kurobi, Chu, and Arlong, as we saw in the last episode. Of course, we all know Luffy's response to all this, the living personification of the idea of freedom. He doesn't want to see a world where someone can't freely enjoy something as simple as an amusement park without the threat of being attacked or abducted. Now, all the stuff surrounding the Human Shop auction house is so unsettling, especially how the Celestial Dragons and the shop workers talk about their quote-unquote merchandise and the whole process. Like, it's just really eerie and kind of like, ugh. Kid actually lays it out pretty explicitly for us how rotten the world is, precisely because of how corrupt the people at the top are, and it makes them, the pirates, look nice compared to how messed up the Celestial Dragons are, as well as the rich elite. There's definitely a tiny bit of commentary to be observed here about how what the world will allow and forgive based on who's doing the action. Kind of like how in the real world, the rich elite get special treatment, sort of the idea that blue-collar crimes are punished way harder than white-collar crimes, even though most of the time the white-collar crimes are arguably much more severe in scale of the crime. The moment where Caime is about to get the collar put on her is especially uncomfortable to watch, with how much glee these people seem to have about their works of selling people into slavery. It's a pretty intense scene, but then we get a slight bit of hope as we see the auctioneer Disco pass out due to that crazy ability that Luffy and Shanks have displayed in the past, where they project their immense amount of intimidation and spirit at things to overwhelm them. At first, the way the camera and the paneling in the manga is done, we're made to think it was that giant that's imprisoned, but then Oda subverts those slight expectations by then focusing the camera on this tiny old man sitting next to the giant. And here we get our first mention of what this intimidation ability is actually called, as the giant refers to it as Haki. But that's not even the close to the biggest reveal here, because we then learn that this man is the coding craftsman that the Straw Hats are looking for, and he's stuck in prison waiting to be sold. But you get the impression that he could get out if he really wanted to. And that's further reinforced by the knowledge of who this guy is. And holy shit, I was not ready for this reveal at this time. And even to this day, it still holds a lot of gravitas. This man is Silver's Rayleigh, the Pirate King's right-hand man. I mean, like, what? This is the second in command of the Roger Pirates, basically the Zoro to Goldie Roger. This man must be immensely powerful. Like, Shaki wasn't kidding when she said that this man was going to be 100 times stronger than Luffy. No wonder he was able to knock out a man with just his spirit. I mean, this is just incredible. This man knows what the One Piece is and where it is. And the crazy thing is, this isn't actually the first time we've seen Rayleigh. Rayleigh could actually be seen all the way back in episode 8 during Buggy's flashback, and he is seen reprimanding both Shanks and Buggy for fighting and bickering with each other. Of course, he looks far different, but Oda has confirmed that was in fact him. So yeah, quite the glow up, even though he's aging. And the introduction of someone in the modern time who was that close to Roger and the One Piece is huge. And I and the rest of the fandom went pretty nuts over this, because imagining all the things this guy must know about the world and the One Piece, as well as thinking about just how powerful this guy really is, was just nuts. I mean, it got you so excited, especially for what his interactions with Luffy was going to be like. Of course, we'd have to wait a little bit to see that. But yeah, the other thing too is, I mentioned earlier that this is the first time we get the mention of Haki, but when it comes to Haki, people often forget that this isn't actually the first time we've heard the term Haki, and it originally fooled me too. But the term Haki used in this context was actually when Whitebeard and Shanks had their little meeting. And the reason why it wasn't quite as clear is because the word Haki by itself is an actual thing, as in someone's willpower or spirit. So back when we didn't know Haki was an established power / ability, most of us just assumed he just meant that Shanks had a very strong spirit. But also the funny and embarrassing thing is, I didn't even figure it out at this moment either. And it wasn't even until later, I misunderstood this for a lot longer, till a later arc, when it was actually explicitly explained even further. So I, for some reason, just never internalized the fact that Haki was an actual, specific ability. I just thought it just referred to somebody with a very strong spirit. I think if you were watching this either through the dubs or the subtitles, it's a little bit easier to pick up on, because they actually explicitly write out Haki in English, like Haki. Whereas in Japanese, Haki is just Haki. It's a word. And so it's hard to distinguish the two. At least it was for me as I was reading this for the first time. We learn in the following episode that the Marines and Garp are actually aware of Rayleigh's presence in the human shop, but he tells his subordinates not to engage him at this time because it'll just lead to unnecessary loss of soldiers, and that it would be unwise for the Marines to take on two legends at the same time, again most likely referencing their impending conflict with Whitebeard over the capture of Ace, which we do see later on in this very episode that it gets announced to the world, and to their shock, that Ace is set to be executed, leading Deus Drake to mention that this will most likely lead to an all-out war with Whitebeard. And so yeah, no wonder Garp wants to avoid picking a fight with Rayleigh right now, as he's got bigger fish to fry with Whitebeard. We also get a likely answer as to why a guy who is supposedly 100 times stronger than Luffy is stuck captured in a human auction house. He apparently racks up large gambling debts in order to pay them off. So he sells himself off and most likely just escapes after the fact, stealing the money. So yeah, he's kind of a boss, but he's also kind of a degenerate at the same time. But I wouldn't expect anything less from one of the most renowned pirates in the world of One Piece. It should also be mentioned he's got one of the coolest sort of epithets out of any character in the series, the Meo or the Dark King. Like, what? That is so cool. Now, back to the auction house. I think first off, it has to be said that the people at the auction house looking to buy these slaves are also the worst. It's not just the world nobles who have this disgusting mindset about owning slaves, but Oda makes a point to show us that even normal rich people are just as bad, as we see the whole place filled with people excited to bid on people. And the anime, for good measure, adds that little conversation between the two people talking about how they're looking forward to buying more slaves and replacing their old used up ones. Which is just, yeah, it's really uncomfortable to listen to these people talk. And you just kind of want to like punch them. Once they all arrive at the auction house, we learn just how corrupt the Marines and the world government are, as we find out that the world government and the Marines just kind of turn a blind eye to this happening and are basically are in on it because the celestial dragons benefit from it. Unable to lay a finger on the auction house, Nami decides that they need to play by their rules in order to get Caime back, and they have to buy her back. And this is where we really see that Nami is an incredibly kind person. Because throughout the entire series, we've seen just how important money is to Nami, and often depicted as greedy, and many people hold this against her character, but I think they fail to realize that when it counts, Nami's priorities are always in the right place. In this case, she is willing to expend the Straw Hats' entire fortune, which is currently valued at 200 million berries, which is a lot, without any hesitation just to get Caime back. And just like Sanji, you just fall in love with Nami all over again because of this. Nami isn't necessarily greedy. Like, sure, money is very important to her, but she's a generous and kind person. She's just incredibly frugal and protective of money because of how she grew up and the trauma related to it. Nami grew up very poor and even lost her mother because they didn't have enough money. Think about that for a second. Nami lost her mom because she didn't have enough money. Like, hell yeah, that's going to leave a lasting mark on a child's life. Not to mention the next 10 years of her life was spent thinking about the cost of the lives of everyone she loves in her village in order to buy them back from Arlong. Her entire life up till very recently was framed from the perspective of never having enough money to protect and save the people she loves. Like, you bet your ass Nami is going to be a little over the top to make sure she accumulates a lot of money and is very cautious about spending it for such occasions when money is what is going to solve the problem and not the usual like punching and kicking that sometimes it is not effective, which this situation clearly demonstrates. In any case, once inside the auction house, not too long after we see Charlos arrive, and he just keeps on adding to his resume of how shit of a person he is by continuously kicking his slave, then telling his servant to go sell him off. And to further add to his infamy, you see just how much everyone in the audience recoils at the mere presence of him, even compared to the other celestial dragons, his father and sister, who are already in the audience. The next scene is probably the darkest thing we've seen in the series thus far. We see that the captain in the cell with Caime and Rayleigh, the one that was really terrified of being a slave, and when he gets to the stage, he bites his own tongue and commits suicide right in front of everybody, choosing death over becoming a slave. Now, this is some really dark stuff, I gotta admit. Almost to the point where I question Oda putting it in there so prominently. As in, he didn't allude to it like some of the other more graphic or intense things. There's no question about what happened here, and we actually see it basically happen. To me, it seems like a bit much for a shonen manga or anime series, especially for the audience of kids that skew on the younger side of that sort of age range, in the 10 to 12-year-old range. So I am a bit surprised that they also left this in the anime as well. But yeah, I mean, I can understand that it does demonstrate just how powerful of an image it is in terms of pointing out how horrifying being a slave is to us, the viewer, and raises the stakes even more for just how desperate of a situation it is to get Caime out of it. Caime is next to be put on sale with Nami ready to bid all their 200 million berries worth of treasure. But before Disco can even start the bidding, Charlos immediately blows everyone out of the water, bidding 500 million berries, pricing everyone, including Nami, out to everyone's shock. And yeah, the situation has gone from bad to absolutely futile. This moment for me was actually incredibly tension filled by seeing just how helpless everyone was to do anything and seemingly having no reasonable way out of it. Like, Oda has done such an incredible job presenting this sort of omnipotent, oppressive threat the world nobles have over everything. Like, you can't touch them, or else it presents certain death. And not only that, they can't just grab Caime and run either because of the collar, leaving them all in a position where there seemingly really is no path out of this. And that sort of weight really starts to like get on top of you as the reader or the viewer. It's pretty incredible, like the emotion you feel while reading this moment in real time. That is until the man that can get things done when there's seemingly no other options, Luffy, comes crashing into the auction house. However, as awesome as it is to have Luffy kind of just charge in there, and it is really satisfying to see, but one thing that should be recognized is that Luffy's charging headfirst strategy does have consequences. And this moment, while cool, it can be seen as Luffy being irresponsible and not thinking before leaping. Of course, Luffy is known for this, and he doesn't ever do this with malice or anything, and always has his heart in the right place. But it has to be said that Luffy is the direct cause for a lot of the trouble and hardships that he's about to cause for everyone, especially putting his crew in major danger. That rhymes. I didn't mean it to sound. Yeah. Anyways, in addition, this could be a serious mistake given their last unsuccessful encounter with an admiral, showing that Luffy as a leader and a person still has some maturing to do. Although, this is a tiny spoiler for the very next episode, Luffy does apologize to his crew, and the crew very much were prepared and even willing to accept the consequences. So, I think Luffy understands his crew enough, and that's kind of also taken into consideration when he made this decision to just straight up charge in. That being said, though, I'm also kind of torn, in terms of criticizing Luffy because of this, because it could be argued that Luffy, had he not taken the action that he did, Caime would have been doomed. And it was precisely because Luffy took such drastic actions that Caime has at least a chance at being saved now. And time again, we see that Luffy's willingness to take the crazy and impossible routes to a solution is what motivates people to take action as well and rally around him. Seeing someone do these insane things that you normally wouldn't do, and seeing that someone could make them possible, is what motivates them. And in this scene, you can even see the other two supernovas, Law and Kid, sort of take genuine interest in Luffy to kind of reinforce this idea. So yeah, this has always been a very interesting moment, not to mention what is about to happen to cap off this episode. And so back to the story, Hachi tries to stop Luffy from charging in, but in the process, his hoodie becomes loose and exposes his other four arms, where we can see the true extent of the racism against the fish people on full display. And the sad thing is, as disgusting as this is, this type of stuff has happened to real people and still happens to people this day around the world. And in the chaos, out of nowhere, Charlos guns down Hachi to the horror of the Straw Hats. And this is a really heartbreaking moment as we see Hachi blame himself while the other people around them just snicker away annoyingly callous things as a person lies there dying of a gunshot wound. It's here where you really start to see what kind of world they're fighting against to change. And this is why the idea of freedom and the concept of the Pirate King and the One Piece are so important. And now we start to get to see the whole picture of what is happening and all why all this sort of pieces are starting to come together in terms of what possibly is the bigger story in terms of One Piece. It's not just about finding a treasure and defeating bad guys. There is something more to it. And yeah, we see the Marines, the world government, and now the world nobles, and how they're all just poisoning the entire world with their corruption. And you see what really is sort of the overarching sort of story or antagonist that they're trying to bring down. Now, obviously, Luffy probably doesn't care about most of this stuff, but that sort of the aspect of freedom is very core to his character. And so, by, I guess, extension, Luffy is obviously fighting against all of this. And the moment where Hachi grabs Luffy is really sad, seeing how desperate Hachi is and how he really has been trying to make amends for all the bad things he did while being a pirate under Arlong. And as sad and infuriating as this moment is, I really like how it deepens Hachi as a character. And it's another testament to Oda how he can take one of the more silly villains from the past and turn them into this emotionally deep character, leading to this incredible exchange between him and Luffy, as well as enhance and give more context to earlier episodes upon rewatch. Because when you watch now Arlong Park, it really hits a little differently when you watch Hachi and all that stuff that Arlong talks about when he says that mer people are superior and that they are the better people, and you see that hatred that he has, and it kind of gives a different meaning to it. And like I said, in no way are we excusing Arlong or even thinking that it's okay what he did, but you certainly understand more about where his motivation comes from. All right, so here is the moment that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. So remember back on Jaya, the episodes where we talked about the one-hit KO punch on Bellamy, and how I mentioned that was in my opinion, the second most satisfying punch in the history of the series. Well, this moment is the number one spot, and it takes the cake by a landslide. This moment has been built up so magnificently up till now with the Celestial Dragons and Charlos especially. It begins with Luffy giving probably the most intense glare we've ever seen him give to anyone. And I think everyone can agree they were getting really anxious and hyped to see Luffy just demolish Charlos and give him the comeuppance that he so rightly deserved. The intensity that Luffy shows here is unlike anything we've ever seen. And interestingly enough, I don't think we've seen Luffy this angry since the moment during Arlong Park, during his fight against Arlong, where he glares at him after breaking Arlong's nose and says that he's going to destroy Arlong Park because this is the place that's making Nami very sad. And of course, he's been angry and intense since then, of course, with like Crocodile and NL and all that stuff. But I don't think he's got this sort of death glare like he does in those two scenes between Arlong and him and Charlos. And this moment, in part of my language, is fucking amazing. Luffy just intensely marches up the stairs towards Charlos, with him firing off a couple shots at Luffy. And if you notice, Luffy doesn't even bother to dodge the first shot, as it just straight up misses his head by inches. Now, obviously, Luffy is unaffected by bullets anyways, but this is still no less an awesome and boss move where he just literally stares at him and just walks straight at him with bullets flying by his head. But then he unleashes the most satisfying punch in the entire series, and maybe anything I've ever seen, to be honest. He just lays into Charlos with a ferocious and raw punch, not even like a Gomu Gomu move, literally just a raw punch right to the face, caving it in to the point where he knocks him back into the manga as all color is drained out of the scene, leaving your eyes completely focusing on the punch itself, which was a genius move by this episode's director. And oh my god, I have never felt more catharsis from a punch than this one. People still talk about this punch to this day, as they should, because it was magnificent. Again, this is one of those scenes where it's enhanced by the medium of animation. Obviously, it still lands an emotional beat and looks cool in the manga, but the way the music builds and the way they can manipulate the weighting and the tension by controlling the pace while Luffy slowly walks up the stairs. And then there's the punch itself. They can show it from different angles and really emphasize the power and intensity by showing that profile shot of Charlos's face just completely smashed in by Luffy's face. Whereas in the manga, we do get this great 2-page full spread of the punch, but it's only after it lands, and we do see Charlos's face just completely like caved in, but we don't actually see the connecting point where Luffy's fist actually meets his face, and it's done so well in the anime too. I have to give kudos to it because everything about this moment is done so well. And so yeah, this is why between the sort of the emotional buildup, the situation, the way it's animated, and the payoff, this punch is easily the most satisfying in the entire series. By far. I don't know that I've seen another one that kind of hits the same way as this one. Now, obviously, there are still great punches and one-hit KOs to come, but I don't know. There's just something about Charlos that you just absolutely hate. Like, there are some villains in this story where you kind of love to hate them. You know, they're terrible people, they're villains, but you also kind of like them. Like, Crocodile is one of them. For me, like, obviously Crocodile is evil, and he deserved to be just get the shit beat out of him. And even like Spandam and Lucci are also very similar. Spandam is probably the closest to Charlos, but Charlos is just another level of just evil. Like, he's just disgustingly evil. And so it's really satisfying to see this man just get his shit pushed in so hard by Luffy here. And I love the raw intensity of this. It's not something flashy or special. Like I said, he doesn't use his Gomu Gomu move. He just straight up punches him. And I love that. And it's such a great moment. Also, one final thing. I don't know where to mention this, but I have to mention Law's crew. He has a walking and clothed polar bear in his crew, which I cannot wait to learn more about this guy. Obviously, I know a lot about this character by the point where I am in the story, but man, when I first saw this, it immediately caught my eye. Like, how could it not? There is literally this cute looking like giant polar bear part of Law's crew in an orange jumpsuit. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that guy is all about, and learning more about Law and his crew. Now, I know this episode is running long, but before we finish it off, there is one last thing to talk about. So we actually get a new opening theme. In episode 395, we get a brand new opening theme. Now, again, if you're watching this through Crunchyroll, then you probably won't get to see this opening either, like the last opening. So you're stuck watching Jungle P for like God knows how long, even though you're supposed to have at least 2 new openings by this point. But yeah, this is being prevented from being used outside of Japan because of the rights with the group that sings both songs, the We Are remix and this new song. Honestly, though, this might be a blessing in disguise because I'll go on to discuss this a little bit later about this theme. And it's kind of problematic for anime-only watchers as there are a ton of spoilers in this opening, so you kind of have to watch at your own peril. But yeah, as the 10th opening theme, we get the song Share the World, performed by the K-pop group TVXQ, marking their 3rd song that they've contributed to One Piece, and the first, being the ending theme Asu wa Kurukara, or Tomorrow Will Come, and then the aforementioned We Are remix. Now, I won't talk too much about this opening here, and save most of it for the spoiler section because I don't really want to ruin a lot of it because it goes deep. And this theme teases a whole host of new things like new characters, locations, and a few of the next couple story arcs. And this is probably the most spoiler heavy opening, animation we've gotten thus far. Now, the song itself is actually one of my personal favorites. It's got such an awesome energy to it as it has a tone that we have yet to hear in any of the openings, like the way it changes the energy from one portion to the next and keeps the song really fun to listen to. This song is notable as the first opening where Brook is also officially part of the crew and showcasing the Worst Generation Supernova Pirates in their glory. Now, one thing I'll mention here, since I wasn't sure where to make this point, but this seems like a good time, but you do see Blackbeard now part of the Shichibukai, But a detail that's often forgotten or mistaken is that Blackbeard is technically also part of the worst generation, but he is not one of the supernovas. The supernovas specifically refer to the 11 rookies whose bounties are at or exceed 100 million berries, but Blackbeard technically doesn't have a bounty. He just went straight from a no-name pirate to a Shichibukai. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out since there's always seems to be like confusion around that distinction around sort of the fandom and the community. I also really love the scenes introducing the Straw Hats as well as the moments we get to see of them just kind of hanging out together. And I especially love the scene where Luffy almost drowns surfing and then Chopper and Brook jump in jump in to save him. Just like we saw earlier at Duval's base. And all the sequences are beautifully animated. And the lyrics of the song are your pretty standard affair in terms of, theming and messaging of togetherness and overcoming the darkness and obstacles as long as you're together, which is very interesting considering what is about to happen. But again, I'll go more into detail in the spoiler section about all of that stuff. But we'll leave the new Share the World opening theme discussion at that. But yeah, with that, let's close this episode out. All around, such an incredible moment. But this now sets up a huge cliffhanger of what's going to happen now that a Marine Admiral is for sure going to show up. And they still don't have Caime nor the Sunny coded. So they can't even just run to Fishman Island yet either. They have to figure out a way out of this mess without being able to run yet. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next episodes. But anyways, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates of when I post new episodes, and to see some pictures of my manga collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Like I mentioned, there will be a decent spoiler section here, mostly talking about Share the World. But yeah, if you're not interested in any of that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! Okay, so spoiler section. I know this episode's already running pretty long, so I will try and keep it as short as possible. But the Share the World spoilers, this opening theme has so many spoilers. I found it kind of surprising just how many they crammed in here. In fact, the entire last minute of this opening theme is so blatantly spoiling so many things, even without context, it's pretty bad. I guess before we get into the actual scenes, I kind of wanted to mention like the message of this song, about the whole thing of being together and being able to overcome obstacles in darkness. It's very interesting that the lyrics of this song contrast with what happens because obviously we know, if you've seen these episodes, presumably if you're in the spoiler section, you've seen these, but we know that the Straw Hats get separated and they basically are separated for 2+ years from this point on. And so I guess it's mainly to highlight the fact that, yeah, because they're not together, all this bad stuff starts happening to all of them. And it's not until they get back together where they can start kind of moving forward again. But it is interesting how the lyrics of this contrast to what's actually going to happen over the next 200 episodes. But yeah, now on to the actual things that appear in the animation. So in the last minute of this song, I think the first thing is how blatant it is about everything. Like, of course, none of this really means much without the proper context, but right off the bat, it shows the battle between the Pacifista and the Straw Hats. Now, to an anime-only watcher, this is a fake out, but it's no less a spoiler as it basically tells the audience that they're going to potentially immediately have to face Kuma again. I mean, obviously this is a pacifista, but even from an anime only watcher, you're still you're still thinking to yourself, did they just spoil the fact that Kuma is going to be back and they have to fight him again? And so, yeah, it seems like an interesting decision to show their fight against the pacifista. Another thing that is just blatant spoilers is the reveal of Kizaru, and to a lesser extent Sentomaru. Like, Kizaru is the second, I guess technically the third admiral to be revealed, but these guys are not going to be revealed for like another couple episodes. And so it is kind of, I don't know, disappointing. The surprise reveal of who who Kizaru is, and even Sentomaru in the anime, because they completely left out his silhouette in the previous few episodes, and so you're not getting the silhouette, but now you're just seeing Sentomaru outright, and we see how big of a role these two play in the remaining climax of the Sabaody arc. Then we just jumped a whole story arc into the real reveal of Amazon Lily and the Kucha tribe. Like, we see pretty much everyone here with Boa's sisters, Marigold and Sandersonia, Marguerite, Sweet Pea, and Aphilandra. Like, among the rest of the entire tribe, completely unobscured with like no silhouette or anything. Like, you just see them plain as day. And speaking of Boa, we get to see her in her entirety way too soon, like mysteriously having a stare down with Luffy. Obviously, this hints at how enamored she becomes with Luffy to a hilarious degree, but it's played seriously here. And then next, we see the rest of the current Shichibukai with another reveal of our first look at Jinbei in the anime, which is another huge spoiler reveal. This one isn't even hiding it. You can tell this is Jinbei. A fishman that is lined up with the other Shichibukai. Geez, I wonder who that could be. Like, if you've been paying attention to this series at all, you immediately will understand who that is. And you're just like, did they just spoil a Jinbei for us? I don't know what it's like to be an anime only watcher, because pretty much for the most of the entire series, apart from the East Blue saga, I've been obviously reading the manga, and so nothing in the anime ever spoils anything for me. So I am very curious to see like what people's reactions were to seeing this opening theme at the time, because it's a lot. And then it jumps to another story arc showing scenes of Luffy fighting his way through Impel Down. Like, good lord, let's slow down a bit here, because you're seeing so much. And even with the last scene with Ace and his Vibra card burning up, you could even argue this is another tease for further following the story arc of, to the Marineford arc as well. So you're getting spoiled the rest of Sabaody. You're seeing Amazon Lily, Impel Down, and Marineford all in this one opening. I mean, it's crazy how much they just like show you in this opening theme. And I can't remember if there was a reason why this was necessary. Like, I'm trying to think, was there sort of some sort of a celebration, or were there a ratings dip? Because I don't think so, because by this point, One Piece's like sales were at an all-time high, and it was only going to get higher with the Marineford arc. So I'm not entirely sure why it was necessary to hype this moment up so much. And for the life of me, I just can't remember what was happening at the time. But anyways, that's kind of all the spoilers for Share the World. Now, the one thing there's a couple other things I kind of want to mention, is that weird anime-only teaser it's implying that Zoro might also have Conqueror's Haki. This early on was kind of crazy to me. I think it was always known that Zoro would get Conqueror's Haki, but seeing him like teasing this early seems very odd. almost like this was unintentional. Like, they just wanted to have Zoro intimidate the guys, but it just seems like he has Conqueror's Haki as well when he was facing those like thugs. I just found that very interesting, because like throughout the rest of the series, until it's officially confirmed in Wano that Zoro has Conqueror's Haki, it just seems like there's this multiple like teases that he might have it, mostly from anime filler, interestingly enough, and not really from the manga itself. And I think this is the first time we actually get to see a hint towards that. It's also fun going back and seeing Law taking an interest in Luffy, knowing just how intertwined their journeys become later on, as well as their friendship. And, speaking of Law, too, like, and I'll probably maybe talk a little bit more about this next episode, I'm not sure, but just how different his characterization is here in Sabaody compared to what he's like even when he shows back up in Marineford, and especially once we see him back in the post-time skip era on Punk Hazard, as well as throughout the rest of the series. Like, here he seems a little bit more, I don't know, creepy, and more antagonistic, and it seemed like Oda might have been setting him up for more of a villain role, or at least an antagonistic role, more so than an ally. And it is interesting to just see how Law is portrayed here and what he eventually becomes to the series. And who would have thought that? Actually, I don't know. Even at that point, I kind of figured that Law would become a big hit because I personally thought he was really cool. Between his voice, his design, and then obviously his powers that we see later on with the Ope no Mi, like, yeah, it was pretty clear to see that Law was going to be really cool. And I'm glad that he ended up becoming not just a big player, but he pretty much becomes, in my opinion, I think Law is a Straw Hat, like, at this point. Obviously we'll talk more about that as the story progresses, but I think with how closely intertwined he and Luffy have become, he is pretty much an honorary Straw Hat, even though he's a captain of his own crew. Well, he may not be anymore. Who knows? Because his ship was just destroyed, and pretty much Beppo is the only person that is with him, I think, now at this point. But anyways, we're getting way too ahead of that, and this episode is running very, very long, so I'm gonna cut it off there. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. See ya.